the really important role the public service policy in Australia.
Yeah, and the public service, but also the politicians. So it was this interaction between the two of really, the monkey, see no evil, hear no evil. We don't want to know anything. Politicians want this to happen, so we're just going to ignore all of the problems.
Right. So, but to put it in a nutshell, the politicians said, we want a budget surplus. We want to save a lot of money. How about you look to the poorest people in Australia to find the money? Those welfare recipients must owe us some money. How about we create an algorithm to go and generate debts from poor people so that the Morrison government could deliver a budget surplus?
Yeah, and they were obsessed with a surplus because they'd ridiculed the Labor Party for not being able to run one, and then there was many years there where the coalition just couldn't run a surplus, and they were desperate to run a surplus.
What could go wrong? Chasing the poorest people in Australia for money to generate a budget surplus. What did go wrong, Matt?
We had no sound for the first couple of minutes. So just do a little recap of.
Oh no!
Well, we've had a problem. So recap, we've got the Robodebt Royal Commission today. Basically, it has not been, it's been a sorry saga. We've seen the public service failure, political failures, and basically we've had a situation where the government was chasing people for money they didn't owe, and it was ultimately illegal.
Yeah, let's be clear. Like nation in a nutshell. Let's put Robodebt in a nutshell. A coalition government, desperate to deliver a budget surplus for purely political reasons, decided to chase the most desperate people in Australia, unfortunately, people who not only were on welfare, but maybe they were overpaid. Let's assume they were. Let's put the burden of proof on them to prove they weren't overpaid, and place this incredible financial, administrative, and psychological burden on the most vulnerable people in Australia. What could go wrong? Matt, what did the Royal Commissioner say went wrong?
Well, basically that it caused massive harm, that it was illegal, that it was an abuse of power, that the public service was just didn't do its job in questioning the legality of it, that it should have been, if everything was running even remotely the way it should have been picked up very early that this couldn't work, that it was illegal, and that it shouldn't have happened.
And let's be clear, one of the reasons it wasn't picked up is that at one point there was legal advice sought to whether it was legal, and the people running it cancelled the request for legal advice. Who wants legal advice when you're worried that you might be illegally chasing debts off poor people? And let's be clear, imagine if a bank was writing to former customers and saying, we think you owe us money, it's on you to prove that you don't owe us money. Or a retailer, or a gambling company. Like, imagine if any other institution in Australia reversed the onus of proof and said to people, if you can't prove you don't owe us money,
then you do.
Then you do, and we will use the full weight of the law to chase you for that debt. And
it's no coincidence that this was the poorest people who were probably in really awful situation to begin with, that they went after. If they had sent a bunch of these notices off to wealthy individuals, to rich individuals, saying, the government saying, you owe us money, and if you don't prove otherwise, we want the money now, what would they immediately have done, Richard?
Straight to the lawyers, straight to the accountants. How very dare you? I'm insulted.
Straight into court.
This
is nonsense.
This is not how a government treats a citizen. But you go after debts for hundreds or thousands of dollars to people who are already on welfare.
Who might be having mental health issues, who are struggling, who have no resources.
Sickness, disability pension, unemployed.
Not even the resources to get basic legal advice.
Maybe they could have run legal aid, and surely there'd just be a whole bunch of lawyers just waiting there, ready to help low-income earners on welfare get legal advice. So talk about a sorry indictment, not just on the previous government for implementing this bizarre policy, but as you said, Matt, on the public service for rolling it out. Just quickly, what has the Royal Commissioner said? We know there's a sealed section, but clearly she's referred some people on to onto other investigative bodies.
Yeah, so the sealed section is basically the part that is going to the NAC, the new Anti-Corruption Commission, and basically she doesn't want to prejudice any sort of criminal or civil trials. So these are basically the decisions. We don't know who it is, but we know that there are some recommendations that people should be investigated for possibly civil, criminal, or certainly for corrupt conduct. And part of the problem here, it wasn't just a political problem. It's also, I mean, in our system, the public service should act as like a check and balance. It should be able to take, crazy ideas from politicians and go, no, wait, mate, that's not going to work. And I think part of the problem here is over the years we've had our public service kind of not handing out frank and fearless advice. They've been worn down, and I think that's a real reform that governments on both sides need to look at.
Yeah, and of course, I don't know who's watching this today, but there was a long time ago, there was a British comedy called Yes Minister.
Yep.
But of course, the Yes Minister was ironic. Like the whole premise of the famous British comedy was that the public service wouldn't listen to what the minister of the day would want. It's just they would say yes and then, carry on with, whatever they were doing before the minister came along. It seems in Australia, the irony's completely been lost. And once a minister says, I want to do this, I want to implement a policy that might not be legal, I want to allocate funds to people who might not deserve it, that rather than the public service saying, well, that's an interesting idea, Minister, but how about we get some legal advice? How about we really clarify how that would work? What we've seen with the Royal Commission, quite sadly, is that some parts of the public service...
and to be clear, there were some parts, particularly in the middle and lower levels, that did resist this.
Yep.
But at that upper echelon level, there was some real failures.
Yeah, indeed. And I think some of the, for me, some of the most distressing footage from the Royal Commission was not just, was the stories of what it had done to destroy people's lives, but also what it had done to destroy the sense of self of, as you said, some of the people working at the coalface who were literally saying, this can't be legal, this can't be right, and being told, that's your job, go and do it. So, I think that it's a pity it's dropped on a Friday afternoon. I don't know who made that decision, but luckily we're here to talk about it live on a Friday afternoon.
And just one of the worst takes of the day, Peter Dutton came out earlier this morning and said that the real victims of this Robodebt Royal Commission, the real victims, Richard, are the Liberal Party, because it's obviously been dropped right before a by-election next weekend, and they truly are the victims here.
Rightio. So the Royal Commission was set up with a reporting date, and the NAC was set up with a commencement date, knowing when a Liberal would resign from Parliament, triggering a by-election, the date of which would be determined by the Electoral Commission. Sounds like a stitch up to me.
It does. Very sad.
Peter Dutton. Well, speaking of not reading the room, how about those interest rates?
Yeah. Philip Lowe, he's been doing a great job reading the room lately, hasn't he?
Well, he's started to try. What's gone on this week?
So we had a pause. So we've had 12 interest rate rises. We've had 4%, basically. Interest rates have gone up since May last year. And there's been a lot of talk, including you and I, but not just you and I. A lot of people have been saying, look, the economy is really slowing down. This is a lot of extra pain that you're putting on mortgage holders and renters. Maybe it's time to ease up on these interest rate increases, time to stop them. Finally, the Reserve Bank Board, Philip Lowe, have listened and they've paused. They haven't committed that this is the peak, but they've paused.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, talk about expectation management. A lot of the media coverage was very much of the, people with mortgages can breathe a sigh of relief. They got some relief this week. The RBA gave them some relief.
They must be, mortgage holders must be really feeling relieved.
Yeah, well, to be clear, people with mortgages didn't get any financial relief. They just avoided more pain.
Yeah. I punched you in the face 6 times. I'm not going to punch you in the face 7th time.
Oh, thank you, Matt.
Relieved.
I've had punching relief.
Yeah.
It's so kind of you. And look, let's put some numbers on this. For people with a $500,000 mortgage, which is a lot of money, but in Australia today...
About an average mortgage.
Yep, people buying homes in capital cities, that's not an unrealistic mortgage. For people with a $500,000 mortgage, that 4% increase in interest rates That's $20,000 a year in extra interest.
And now that's a lot of money to find in the budget.
That's a lot of money, especially when you realise that you've got a minimum wage a bit over $40,000 a year, a median wage around $70,000. There are a lot of people working full time in Australia for well less than $100,000 a year. To increase interest rates on a mortgage by $20,000 a year, this is an enormous impact to impose on households. Matt, why does Philip Lowe like hurting young people with mortgages so much?
Well,
what's the plan?
Well, he hates inflation.
Right.
And what's more is...
That's why he hates people with mortgages.
Well, yeah, it seems to be. But he hates inflation, and he's absolutely convinced that the way you stop this kind of the inflation that we're currently seeing is that you make people poor, that it must be being driven by consumers spending too much and wages rising too fast.
So if I'm earning $80,000 a year, I'm now paying an extra $20,000 a year in interest. So I'm going to go and spend less money at the shops. I'm going to go on less holidays. How does me feeling poor reduce inflation?
Well, basically, if inflation is caused by this massive excess of demand, that firms are unable to keep up with demand, that lots of people are banging on their door wanting their goods, they increase their prices in order to make a bigger profit. Well, if people stop banging on their door demanding their goods, they can't increase those prices.
So if we impoverish enough consumers, there won't be many people trying to buy the things.
If we break the economy to save it.
Right.
Break the economy to save it.
Now, the problem is we may well be breaking the economy and not saving it if inflation is being caused by other sources. And to be clear, because we've had the COVID and because globally there have been what we call supply shocks, a lot of factories couldn't make a lot of things for a long time. So we've got supply shocks from COVID. Russia obviously invaded the Ukraine, which has been incredibly disruptive for energy supply around the world. So we've got COVID driving prices up, we've got a war driving prices up, and we've got Philip Lowe going, I'm going to pull the Australian interest rate lever.
It must be workers. It's got to be workers. It's got to be wages.
So the problem is, it's possible, and I fear likely, that we've loaded up an enormous amount of pain on about what, Matt? The 30% of Australians with mortgages?
So 40% of Australians have mortgages, 30% own their home outright, so they're not going to be affected by this at all. And guess what? They're the wealthy ones. And about 30% of people are renting. And we've seen rents also climb quite dramatically. So it's not a huge section of the population, and it's probably a younger section of the population. I mean, people who've just got into the housing market in the last few years, who've bought when the house prices are high, they're likely to have the big mortgages. Yeah. They're likely to be the ones that are hurting the most.
And sadly, those people with the biggest mortgages, as you said, they're the ones that have probably bought a home most recently. That is, they're probably the people who most recently bought a home after Philip Lowe said...
What did he say again, Richard?
I'm not going to increase interest rates until real wages start growing, and I'm not going to start increasing interest rates until 2024.
2024. So it's 2023 now, and they're up 4%.
Yeah. Whoops.
Ouch.
Big whoops. So sadly, the group of people that are most affected by these interest rate rises are probably the same group of people who took Philip Lowe at his word when he said he expected interest rates to stay really low. And to be clear, that group is disproportionately young people.
Yep. And so what's driving inflation? It's those supply side impacts, but it's also been profits. We've seen profits boom. Wages haven't certainly increased, and we've got even more proof of that. We've had the OECD, we've had the European Central Bank, we've had the Federal Reserve, and now we've got the IMF in the last fortnight saying that, we've had a look at, certainly for Europe, we've looked at what's causing inflation, and guess what? The biggest cause? Profits.
Wow. So let me get this right. The firms are increasing prices at far faster rate than their wages are going up.
And their other costs, their costs have gone up because of the war in Ukraine and the supply side issues. But instead of putting them up by the amount that their costs have gone up, they put them up by more. And so therefore their profits have gone up.
Hang on, Matt. So if each company, or if lots of companies were doing that, what we'd see is the profit share of national income rising.
Yep, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Exactly what we're seeing.
Right, so we can tell that firms are increasing their prices a lot faster than their wages are going up. We've got data. We've got what companies are telling their shareholders, which is,
Woohoo!
I deserve my bonus.
Yeah, I need a big bonus. I'm a CEO. I'm
CEO.
making big profits.
Oh, by the way, Matt, how's CEO pay going?
Well, yeah, workers' pay isn't rising as fast as inflation, but good news, CEOs is rising at twice the inflation
well,
rate.
there's some good news.
Some good news.
Green shoots.
Green shoots, that's right. And they deserve it.
Maybe it'll trickle down.
Trickle down, yeah.
So yeah, we know that firms are increasing their prices faster than wages. We know that firms are telling their shareholders, yay us, we've increased our prices a lot and profits are up, so expect bigger dividends. And we know from what we call the national accounts, the Australian Bureau of Statistics national data, we can see that profit share of GDP is
bigger and
rising.
bigger.
But unfortunately, Philip Lowe's been blaming workers for this, just like he's been blaming consumers for doing all that spending. But perhaps in good news for those people that took Philip Lowe at his word, how's the RBA governor's job security looking, Matt?
Yeah. So the RBA's his term ends in September. The two governors before him have got a 3-year extension. I don't think Philip's going to get that. You know, there's been no announcement. We'll see an announcement from the Treasurer this month, probably. But yeah, his extension is looking very shaky.
All right, and it's really important that not only we get a new Reserve Bank governor, but whoever that new Reserve Bank governor is thinks differently.
Yeah, no, they really need to recruit outside the bank. So Philip Lowe, for example, was deputy governor before he became governor. In fact, he spent, I think it was 40 years in the Reserve Bank.
Nothing like a breadth of experience.
Exactly right. But, you know, what the Reserve Bank needs and what the RBA review that happened just this year said was that they had very resilient thinking and they needed to embrace a broader view of ideas. And I think the best way of doing that is to recruit outside of the RBA.
Yeah, and apart from jacking up interest rates, Matt, are there things that the Reserve Bank or others can do to help rein in inflation?
Yeah, well, once you understand that it's profits, then there's all sorts of things we can do. We could tax profits with excess profit taxes, which are very efficient, and economists like you and I love those kind of things, but all economists think that super profits taxes are a great idea. You could introduce more competition in the market. You could break up big business. So to be clear, the part of business that is making the most profits at the moment are those big businesses with market power. We could start to break those up. There are all kinds of things we can do rather than just slugging mortgage holders with ever higher interest rates.
But it's been such a good year for slugging mortgage holders with interest rates, Matt. That interest rate lever's had a real workout. Now, before you said that the whole idea of jacking up the interest rates, reducing people's ability to go to the shop and spend to control inflation, well, you know, I don't think that's going to work very effectively. But at the same time that we're telling people with mortgages that we have to lower their disposable income with interest rate increases, haven't we got those stage 3 tax cuts coming in soon?
We do, yeah.
Tell me how they go to help control inflation.
Well, I would assume they're not. They're $20 billion in the first... Next year, the government is going to dump $20 billion, so masses of excess demand, and it's going to funnel it not into everybody's pockets, mind you, Richard.
Oh, well, that's a pity. I was waiting for my $20 billion.
Well, no, it's going to be a sort of a narrower field of people. Those earning more than $180,000 a year. They're the ones that are going to really benefit.
Let me guess, they're going to get a reward for effort.
Yeah. In fact, if you earn more than $200,000 a year, $9,000 a year, Richard.
$9,000 a year.
Now, given they put up mortgages by $20,000 for people who probably aren't earning $200,000, admittedly, that's a big chunk of money.
So isn't anyone in the government or indeed the Reserve Bank worried that giving $9,000 to people with high incomes might lead to an increase in spending?
I would have thought that the RBA and Treasury would be out there banging and shouting and saying, look, this is going to be inflationary. We don't expect that, inflation will be back down into the target range before these tax cuts kick in.
Matt, I can't get my head around this. I've heard the RBA governor who says his only job is to worry about interest rates. Now, I've heard him tell workers to pull their heads in.
Yep.
Why isn't he? So he's clearly not afraid to tell other people what to do to help his fight against inflation. What's he said about the stage 3 tax cuts?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Entirely silent on the stage 3 tax cuts.
Wow. Well, I don't know. I'm just guessing he might earn more than $200,000 a year.
He does. Consider it 5 times as much, I think.
Oh well, who amongst us doesn't earn a mil? Yeah. Well, let's get this into perspective. We're jacking up interest rates to slow down people with mortgages' consumer spending. Because if we slow down their consumer spending, we think it'll help control inflation. But we've got stage 3 tax cuts that were promised years before COVID, years before the war in Ukraine. So we had these tax cuts that probably I thought a bad idea at the time.
Yeah, 2018. We're talking about 5 years ago. These tax cuts were announced.
5 years ago, Scott Morrison cooks up these tax
when he was
cuts.
Treasurer. That's not PM Scott Morrison. That's Treasurer Scott Morrison. That's how long ago it was.
And at the time, when he announced them, people said, how can we afford this?" He said, "Of course we can. With all the growth and productivity I'll deliver,
There'll be surpluses forever.
the money will be raining from the sky.
The economy will grow."
We've had the biggest recession ever. We've had real wages fall. We've now got the highest inflation we've seen for many years, and interest rates rising faster than any time on record. But apparently we just have to stay the course with these stage 3 tax cuts.
Yep. And not give tax relief for those that are hurting the most, but basically just a small proportion at the very, very top.
Right, so it's complicated stuff. The CEOs getting the average 15% pay rise, they'll get the stage 3 tax cuts.
They'll get $9,000, yep.
They'll get $9,000, and the people earning $45,000 a year who are seeing real wages decline.
Those on the minimum wage, for example?
Those on the minimum wage, they're seeing inflation rise faster than their wage. If I'm on $45,000, how much of the stage 3 tax cut?
$0 exactly.
Nothing. Don't I need some incentive?
No, clearly they don't need an incentive. They've just got to basically suck it up.
Right, so if I'm a young person who has a mortgage and doesn't earn a lot of money, I get to pay a lot more in interest and don't get any tax cut.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm a high income earner who's older and has paid off their house, I don't get any pain from the interest rate increases, but I'll get a $9,000 tax cut.
And we actually got some interesting data this week where house prices were still rising, which is a little weird. Like normally when interest rates increase quite dramatically...
who amongst us hasn't thought of snapping up an extra house at this point?
Well, yeah, like people don't buy houses. You expect house prices to go down. But it's actually one particular segment of the housing market we found out.
First time buyers?
No. It's the top quarter. The top quarter. And most of those, they were interviewing some real estate agents who were saying they pay with cash.
Oh.
They don't. So if you don't have to take out a mortgage, right? Well, guess what? There's no real problem with higher interest rates slowing your ability to buy a house. You're paying cash anyway.
It's a good time to be rich.
Yeah, basically. And, they might be looking forward to their $9,000 a year in the stage 3 tax cuts.
Unbelievable. So unfortunately, in Australia, we started off talking about how when the previous government wanted some money for a budget surplus, it actually went and thought, let's generate debts on the poorest people in the country and get them to prove to us that they might not owe any money. And all that was done in the name of a budget surplus.
Yep.
And that same government that did that set us up with $250 billion worth of stage 3 tax cuts, which we're sticking with.
No, you got it wrong. 250, that's all right.
I'm out of date.
You're out of date. So it's over the next 10 years, it's $313 billion.
Oh, come on, Matt.
You're out by $63 billion.
You're being a pedant.
I am clearly being a pedant.
$63 billion in a society that can spend $300 billion on subs. Next you'll be telling me it's 310. Who cares about 10? So, yeah, look, unfortunately, Australia, let's be clear, the reason that we have rising inequality in Australia is not market forces, it's government choices.
Yeah.
We've actually made choices to load up the pain of fighting against inflation on a subset of the population, and we've decided to shovel an enormous amount of money out the door in terms of tax cuts, but onto a different subset of the population. And the reality is that the highest income people with the highest wealth are the most likely to benefit from the stage 3 tax cuts and the least likely to be struggling with mortgage pain, either because they've paid off their houses or they're paying cash for their new house. So yeah, I really think that we need to understand that inequality isn't just something that happens.
No, it just doesn't magically appear. It's not, and it's not inevitable.
No, and Matt, I might be crazy here, but do other countries have a different approach to their tax system than Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of different ways you can tax, Richard. And surprise, surprise, when you have a country that does take taxing seriously, that is interested in taxing fairly, those countries are more likely to be high income. They're more likely to be happier. They're more likely to have better health outcomes. They're more likely to have better educational outcomes. They're basically any measure of well-being you'd like to have a look at. The higher the tax rate of the country, the more likely that measure of well-being will be.
Mind blown. So what you're telling me is that according to science, according to data, according to measuring things, the countries that collect more tax and spend more money on public health, public education, public infrastructure, public housing,
social welfare,
these are the countries that are richer than average,
healthier than average, better educated,
average.
happier than average.
It's as if everything we've been told about if only we cut taxes some more, we'd be rich and happy was complete nonsense.
Yeah, and furthermore, there's been a huge amount of data collected now by the IMF, the OECD, that basically shows that countries that have lower levels of inequality, that share their wealth more evenly, grow faster and become richer than countries that don't.
Those pinko lefties at the International Monetary Fund,
yeah.
aren't they the same ones that agreed with us that it was profits driving inflation?
And the OECD, run by that pinky Matthias Cormann. And for those that don't remember him, he was Scott Morrison and Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull's finance minister.
West Australian Liberal.
Liberal.
Don't get much more pinky lefto than that, do you?
Yeah, and he's now in charge of the organisation that thinks that profits are driving inflation and that more equal societies grow faster.
Oh, he's been influenced by those Europeans, Matt.
Bloody data, that's the problem. Evidence. It's terrible.
All right. Well, I think it's probably about time to wrap up. Matt, we started talking about Robodebt. Obviously, we've talked about interest rates. We've talked about tax. Big picture, where's the Australian economy at right now, and what are the things that we should be worried about? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, look, the Australian economy is actually in a really precarious point at the moment. We've seen that economic growth has slid down to almost zero, and we know that every extra interest rate rise is going to suck more growth out of the economy. So, and around the world too, because all around the world we've seen interest rates go up. There are a lot of economies that are facing a recession. Recession is not necessarily inevitable. The one question, you're an economist too, Richard, that everybody asks is there going to be a recession? And you kind of have to go, well, I don't know is the honest thing. But what I can say is that, there is a real risk at the moment of that.
Yeah.
And recessions, to be clear, are terrible. Not just, people are a bit poor for a little while. They cause real lasting scarring and damage to human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, let's be clear, so no one knows, no one's got a crystal ball. We certainly don't want to pretend to. But with things like recessions, will we have one or won't we? You're spot on. No one knows for sure, but also it depends on what we do.
Yeah, exactly right.
And if we keep jacking up interest rates,
then we'll have one.
Then we're far, far more likely to have one. So yes, things like recessions can happen because of world events and unexpected events. COVID obviously caused a big recession. No government could have stopped that. But one of the reasons we bounced back so fast was that the Australian government made good decisions. Here we are on the precipice of a potential recession, and
we can't blame COVID. There was no international event that forced a recession. If we have a recession now, it will be totally self-inflicted or RBA inflicted.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us this afternoon. We love putting on these things, and check out the other materials that we put up on our YouTube site. If you like what we're doing, share it on social media, talk to your friends about it, and more importantly, ask simple questions of the people that are doing this crazy stuff, because apparently apparently CEOs getting pay rises don't cause inflation.
Not a problem.
Low income earners asking for a pay rise going to ruin the economy.
Even if it's just to keep up with inflation.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Thanks.